Story 1. My son and I went to greet my husband returning from a business trip. Suddenly, my son, with his uncanny gift, said, "Dad, the woman in the trunk is still alive." My husband turned pale, and his hands started shaking uncontrollably. My name is Sarah Johnson. I was gazing at the golden-hued evening sky from the window of our home in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Boston. Even at 38, the green eyes reflecting in the mirror still retained the same sharpness from when I worked at a top-tier advertising agency. However, the light dwelling in those eyes has changed somewhat. It's now a complex glow mixing love for my 8-year-old son, Ethan, and amazement at his peculiar ability. "Mom, I saw it again." Ethan's voice made me turn around. He was pointing out the window with a serious expression. I stood next to my son and followed his gaze. I couldn't see anything, but I never doubted Ethan's words. "What did you see, Ethan?" "Grandpa. He's smiling under the tree in the garden." I caught my breath. That grandpa Ethan referred to was my father, who passed away 3 years ago. Shortly after Ethan was born, we realized he had the ability to see things invisible to ordinary people. At first, I thought it was just a child's vivid imagination, but eventually I had to acknowledge it was real. I became convinced Ethan's power was genuine when he was 4 one day. He suddenly said, "Grandma's coming." 10 minutes later, my mother showed up unannounced. Since then, Ethan's predictions have come true many times, becoming deeply rooted in our family's daily life. However, this special power can sometimes be a burden. Ethan occasionally says he sees deceased people, which can frighten him. I'm torn between wanting to protect my son and not wanting to suppress his ability. "It's all right, Ethan. Grandpa must be watching over us." As I gently embraced Ethan's shoulders, trying to reassure him, I heard the front door open, announcing my husband Michael's return. Michael, just thinking his name brings a small pain to my chest. At 40, my husband is still an attractive and successful man, but lately I've been feeling a subtle rift between us. "I'm home," Michael's voice echoed, but it lacked the warmth it once had. He had been using work as an excuse to avoid spending time with the family. He's been coming home late more often and going out frequently on weekends. "Welcome home, Michael," I replied, feigning calm, but anxiety was swirling inside me. Our relationship, once filled with love, has now become distant. When I try to talk about Ethan's ability, Michael becomes irritable and tries to change the subject. "Dad, welcome home." Ethan ran happily towards his father, but Michael's response was cold. He just lightly patted his son's head and immediately headed for his study. Watching his retreating back, I let out a deep sigh. This is our family's daily life now: Ethan's special ability, the RFT with Michael, and my yearning for self-fulfillment as a full-time housewife, all these intertwined, complexly weighing heavily on my heart. However, I didn't yet know that an event that would greatly shake this peaceful daily life was about to occur. That day I had been restless since morning. It was the day Michael was returning from a week-long business trip. Although our relationship had grown cold recently, I found myself looking forward to my husband's return. "Ethan, Dad's coming home. Let's go greet him together." Seeing my son's face brighten, I felt a bit guilty. Ethan respects and admires his father, but lately Michael had been cold towards his son too. As we stepped out of the front door, Michael's car was just pulling into the garage. Ethan let out a small cheer and was about to dash off, but I gently held his shoulder. For some reason, anxiety was spreading in my chest. Michael got out of the car and walked towards us with a tired expression. His eyes lacked the warmth they once had. "Welcome home, Michael. I'm back." We exchanged curt greetings, and Michael moved to open the trunk. At that moment, Ethan suddenly cried out, "Dad, there's a lady in the trunk." I gasped. Michael's face turned pale at Ethan's words. His hand shook and he dropped the keys. "What are you saying, F?" Michael's voice was filled with anger I had never heard before. He walked towards Ethan and grabbed his arm tightly. "Don't joke around such nonsense. It hurts, Dad." Ethan's scream brought me back to my senses. "Michael, stop it." I quickly pulled Ethan away and held him close. Ethan was trembling, and the fear transmitted through his small body clenched my heart. "What are you doing scaring Ethan like that? What are you teaching him, making a child tell such lies?" Michael's eyes were bloodshot, as if he were a different person. He roughly ran his fingers through his hair and strode towards the garage. "Michael, wait." Neither my voice nor Ethan's crying seemed to reach his ears. Michael entered the garage, opened the trunk, and began rummaging through it. "See, there's nothing here," he shouted triumphantly, but there was an unnatural excitement in his voice. I stood frozen, still holding Ethan. Sarah, you need to teach this child to distinguish between reality and imagination, such nonsense. Michael's words trailed off, his eyes fell on Ethan trembling in my arms. For a moment a look of regret seemed to cross his face, but it quickly returned to a hard expression. I'm tired from work, leave me alone for a while. With those words, Michael disappeared into the house. Ethan and I were left standing in the garage. Mom, it's true, there was a lady. Ethan's small voice made my chest tighten. Because I believed in my son's mysterious power, this situation was terrifying. I know, Ethan, I believe you. I gently stroked my son's head while staring at the house where Michael had disappeared, the unease that had been building up, and today's events, I can't ignore it anymore. I need to know the truth. That night after Ethan had fallen asleep, I made a decision. Tomorrow, after Michael leaves for work, I'll check the car trunk. Whatever the truth may be, I have the courage to face it to protect my family. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. Michael had left for work early, and I had sent Ethan off to school. Left alone in the house, I sat at the kitchen table, recalling yesterday's events. It's now, I told myself, slowly standing up. As I put my hand on the garage door, I hesitated for a moment. But remembering Ethan's sad face, I mustered my courage. Entering the garage, Michael's car stood quietly. I took a deep breath and approached the car, taking the spare key in hand. I tried to unlock the trunk, noticing my hand was shaking. Calm down, Sarah, I told myself, slowly opening the trunk. At first, it seemed empty, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I thought I saw something move in the back. I gasped and cautiously reached out. Suddenly, something like fabric moved, and a woman's face appeared from underneath. Help me, a weak voice was heard. I stepped back in surprise, but quickly regained my composure. Are you all right? I called out as I helped the woman out. She was a young woman in her late 20s with long blonde hair in disarray and a pale face. I supported her as I led her into the house and sat her on the living room sofa. I'll get you some water, I said as I headed to the kitchen, but my mind was in turmoil. I couldn't tell if this was reality or if I was dreaming. When I returned with water, the woman seemed a bit calmer. Thank you, she said, drinking the water in one gulp. My name is Jessica, she began slowly. I met your husband Michael 3 months ago. I gasped in affair. It was one of the answers I had expected, but being confronted with the reality of it hurt my chest. However, Jessica's next words were far beyond my expectations. At first it was a normal relationship, but then I realized he was involved in illegal transactions. Illegal transactions? I couldn't believe my ears. Jessica nodded. His company appears to be conducting legitimate business on the surface, but behind the scenes they're dealing in illegal drugs. I found out about it, and her voice trembled. He started threatening me, and yesterday, when he found out I was going to report to the police. I was at a loss for words. The fact that Michael was having an affair was shocking, but even more so was the fact that he was involved in illegal activities. But why in the trunk? I managed to squeeze out. He was trying to silence me, but maybe he was afraid to kill me, so it seems he was planning to take me somewhere far away and abandon me. In my mind, Michael's abnormal reaction yesterday came back to me now. I understood why he had been so upset and exploded in anger at Ethan's words. We need to report this to the police, I said, taking out my smartphone, but at that moment I heard the front door open. Sarah, it's me. I forgot some documents and came back to get them. It was Michael's voice. Jessica and I looked at each other, frozen. Footsteps approached. I quickly hid Jessica in the closet and took a deep breath, trying to appear calm. Sarah, where are you? Michael's voice came from the hallway. I'm here in the living room, I answered, suppressing my trembling voice. The moment Michael entered the living room, I noticed his eyes quickly scanning the room, as if searching for something or someone. What's wrong? I asked, trying to sound as natural as possible. Oh no, he answered nervously. I'm looking for some documents. Haven't you seen them? I'm sorry, I didn't notice. Michael walked around the room, starting to search here and there. His movements didn't seem like just looking for documents. Sweat bead on his forehead, and he occasionally glanced at me. Suddenly, there was a small sound from the closet. I saw Michael's body tense for a moment. Didn't you hear something? His voice was tinged with tension. Isn't it just your imagination? I feinted calmness, but my heart was pounding fiercely. Michael slowly began to approach the closet. I held my breath, desperately thinking about what to do if he found Jessica like this. That's when it happened. The doorbell rang. At the sound of the doorbell, Michael and I froze simultaneously. After a moment of silence, Michael turned to me and said in a low voice, "No one should be coming." His eyes clearly showed suspicion. I took a deep breath and, trying to appear as calm as possible, said, "I'll get it," and headed for the front door. When I opened it, Ethan was standing there. His homeroom teacher was standing next to him, looking concerned. "Ethan, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice a mix of surprise and relief. The teacher explained. Ethan suddenly felt unwell. He said he wanted to go home, so I brought him. At that moment, Ethan whispered in my ear, "Mom, Grandpa said we needed to come home." I caught my breath. Ethan's mysterious power had sensed something again. "Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the trouble," I said to the teacher, and led Ethan into the house. When we returned to the living room, Michael was standing there looking uneasy, his eyes fixed on Ethan, his expression a mix of complex emotions. "What's wrong, Ethan?" Michael's voice held more irritation than concern. That's when it happened. The closet door slowly opened, and Jessica appeared with trembling hands. She pointed at us and said in a shaky voice, "I can't hide anymore." The air in the room froze. In an instant, the color drained from Michael's face, and he tried to say something, but couldn't form words. Suddenly, Ethan asked, "Dad, why are you lying? Grandpa said you were doing bad things." Michael sank to the floor as if crushed by his son's words. At that moment, we heard sirens. Someone had called the police. The next few minutes felt like a dream. Police officers entered the house, assessed the situation, and restrained Michael. Jessica began giving her testimony in tears while I held Ethan close, staring blankly at everything unfolding before me. After the police interrogation was over and the house became quiet again, I finally began to accept reality. Michael's hidden face, his criminal activities, and his betrayal of our family. Now that everything had come to light, a quiet determination was growing within me. After putting Ethan to bed, I sat at the kitchen table deep in thought. What should I do now? The answer was clear. The next morning, I called a lawyer to discuss divorce proceedings. Then I explained the situation to my parents and decided to stay at their home for a while. As I packed our belongings, I looked out the window. A fresh breeze was blowing, as if announcing the start of a new season. "Mom, where are we going?" Ethan asked anxiously. I hugged my son and said gently, "We're going to a new home, Grandma and Grandpa's house. We're going to start a new life there." Ethan thought for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Okay, I understand, but what about Dad?" I took a deep breath and carefully chose my words. "Dad, we won't be able to see him for a while, but Mom will be by your side. Ethan, let's do our best together." Holding my son's small hand tightly, I renewed my determination. The road ahead won't be easy, but with Ethan's special ability in the bond between us, mother and son, we should be able to overcome any difficulty. Before leaving the house, I looked back one last time, and memories of our once happy days flashed through my mind like a kaleidoscope, but those are now in the past. It's time to find a new life, new happiness. "Well then, shall we go?" I said, and we took our first step towards a new future. Story 2. My husband cried, "Congratulations on the birth," when he saw our newborn baby. But at that moment, I decided to give up the baby. The reason is, congratulations on the birth. My husband was sobbing while holding a newborn baby in the hospital room. The moment I saw that scene, I made up my mind to kill the baby. Why? Because those words of blessing weren't meant for me. Next to him was a young woman who had just given birth. What on earth was going on? As I investigated, I discovered something unbelievable, and I was shaking with sadness and anger. Just you wait. I decided to plunge my husband, who must have been at the height of happiness, into hell. I met my husband, Stanley, at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. He was working for a large company and had been hospitalized for a stomach ulcer due to overwork. I happened to be assigned to his care. As we talked, we discovered we were from the same state. We had many things in common, including hobbies, and we hit it off. We continued to meet even after Stanley was discharged. Sounds like something out of a drama, doesn't it? From there, our relationship developed, and we got married. "I'll definitely make Amanda happy," Stanley had declared to everyone around us. True to his word, he was always kind, and I felt happy in our peaceful daily life. However, after a year of marriage, we still hadn't been blessed with a child. I thought we should seek treatment sooner rather than later, so one day I decided to visit an OBGYN. The test results showed that I had a body that made it difficult to conceive. I had suspected as much, but when faced with the reality, I couldn't hide my distress. "It's okay, let's work on this together, we're a couple after all." But Stanley's warm words enveloping my anxiety saved me. As we started fertility treatments, I thought it would be inconvenient to continue working as a nurse with busy shifts and night duties, so I transferred to a nursing facility. It was day shifts only, which was easier on my body, and I had more time with my husband. It seemed perfect. Stanley was very supportive, but time passed without us being able to conceive, and I turned 39. Amanda, I have something to talk about. Why don't we take a break from fertility treatments for a while? My husband suggested one day. Why don't you want children? I don't have much time given my age. Feeling anxious, I responded with a stronger tone than intended. I can't bear to see you so down lately. All we talk about is this, right? Well, of course it's hard. I can't help it. I'm trying so hard. Oh, and the doctor said you should get tested too. How are you saying it's my fault? We ended up arguing, and from that day on things became awkward between us. Our conversations were limited to the bare necessities, and Stanley started coming home later. I guess he didn't want to face me. This isn't good for the treatment. I need to do something, I thought, and decided to make time to talk with Stanley. Just one more year until I'm 40. I don't want to give up until then, please. I thought that would be a good milestone, and I told my husband, all right, let's make that our goal. After that, we worked on the treatments together again as a couple, but I still didn't get pregnant, and I reached my 40th birthday. This is what we decided. We've done all we could, so I have no regrets. I made a new resolution to live the rest of my life with Stanley, just the two of us. On our days off, we would go out together or travel, and we were enjoying ourselves to some extent. However, at some point, I noticed something odd about my husband's behavior. He seemed distracted even when he was with me, and he started breaking promises more often, using work as an excuse. I'm just busy with work and tired. Besides, we've spent so much money on fertility treatments, so I need to work. I see. I'm sorry. What he said made sense, and I couldn't say anything back. However, I noticed that the amount of money Stanley was putting into our joint account was decreasing, and the balance in our couple's account was getting low. Honey, have you been withdrawing from our savings lately? Yes. What did you use it for? You could have at least told me. I didn't mind him using the money, but I thought he should have consulted me beforehand. Then my husband glared at me with his eyes narrowed. Shut up. What's wrong with me using my own money? Don't interfere with everything. Stanley had never raised his voice like that in the 7 years we'd been married, so I was surprised and shocked. Did I say something so wrong? Maybe I'm interfering too much with him, as he says. I thought I had given up on having children and changed my mindset, but maybe I was still clinging to him because he was all I had. I felt remorseful. After that incident, there was a certain coldness between us. Thinking I wanted to be emotionally independent from my husband and live my own life, I threw myself into work. Unlike when I worked in the hospital ward, I enjoyed having time to talk leisurely with the residents in the home-like facility, and I thought nursing was my true calling. One day, a resident said, I want to go see my grandchild who was just born. When I checked with my supervisor, they said it was okay if family members accompanied them, so I ended up going along on this outing. When we arrived at the maternity ward that day, the resident was overjoyed to meet her granddaughter and the newborn baby. I decided to wait in the hallway, but as I sat in a chair, I saw a man who looked very much like my husband entering the next room. He seemed to be in a hurry and didn't notice me. Stanley, no, it couldn't be, I thought, but I missed the chance to call out to him. Still feeling curious, I decided to peek into the next room. Sure enough, the man was my husband, and next to him was a smiling woman I didn't recognize. Congratulations on the birth. Seeing him sobbing while holding the baby, I was confused about what was going on. It didn't seem like he was just there to congratulate an acquaintance. Then the next moment, Stanley hugged the woman. You did great, thank you. I couldn't bear to watch any more and left on the bus ride back with the resident who had finished her visit. My mind was filled with thoughts of my husband. Could that person be? I didn't want to think about it, but she could only be his mistress. If so, does that mean the newborn baby is Stanley's child? It would explain why he had been coming home late and why he had been away from home so often, and maybe he had been using our savings for that woman. I considered every possible scenario and matched it with his recent behavior. In fact, the moment I saw them in the hospital room, I had an impulse to kill their baby. The woman could have children, but I couldn't. If only that baby wasn't there. My anger was directed solely at the child, but I quickly realized that it was all my husband's fault. I decided to investigate. Stanley confirmed the fact of his affair and then thoroughly punish him. First, I started taking action to gather evidence. A month later, I was waiting for my husband to come home. I had decided that day would be the day of reckoning. Why? Because the next day was my 41st birthday. I thought I would settle everything and make a fresh start. Just as I was thinking this, I heard the sound of the front door key turning. I'm home. Why are you making such a scary face? He looked at me with a puzzled expression as soon as he saw me, and I looked the same as always. More importantly, I have something important to talk about. Does it have to be now? I'm tired, just sit down, it won't take long. I told my grumbling husband in a serious tone, leaving no room for argument. Stanley sat down across from me at the living room table, muttering, "Fine, what's this about? Don't tell me you want to start fertility treatments again." He laughed through his nose and spoke in a slightly mocking tone. "I'll cut to the chase because I don't want this to be troublesome. I saw you at the hospital a month ago. There's nothing wrong with me." As he started to say that, my husband suddenly seemed to remember something, and his face froze. I didn't elaborate and waited for his next words. "Oh, that was just me going to congratulate an acquaintance on their baby." He was trying to act calm while hiding his panic. "Oh, but you were hugging that woman, weren't you?" I turned on my smartphone that was on the table and showed it to my husband. It was a video I had secretly taken of the two of them. "She's just a huggy person. It was just for fun." My husband started making nonsensical excuses. I deliberately didn't address that and instead showed him some photos. "You even accompanied her on the day she was discharged from the hospital. That's more than just an acquaintance, isn't it?" They showed Stanley standing close to the woman holding the baby as they left the hospital. There were also pictures of him entering what seemed to be her apartment. "That's..." My husband started to say something, but then fell silent. On that day, I had heard the resident's granddaughter saying it seems the person in the next room gave birth on the same day, so I thought their discharge day would probably be the same, and I had planned to stake out the entrance of the maternity ward on my day off from work. On the day I had the idea to follow Stanley, so I tailed him from the morning when he got on a bus heading in a different direction from his workplace and went straight to the hospital. I knew my guess was right. As I waited outside the hospital, my husband came out with the woman and the baby, and I captured it in photos. "So you betrayed me and had an affair with this woman, right?" Stanley wouldn't meet my eyes and didn't answer. "I have proper evidence. I think it would be better if you confessed with your own mouth." I provoked Stanley, but he just glared at me and kept his mouth shut. So I spread out several printouts of messages exchanged between my husband and his mistress on the table. They were from Stanley's smartphone, and his mistress appeared to be a 30-year-old woman named Sarah who worked at a strip club. Stanley hadn't deleted the message history, and all their exchanges were still there. There were messages like, "I love you more than anyone," and "Let's go shopping for baby clothes together next time." Just like a lovey-dovey couple. Moreover, among the photos they had sent to each other, there were pictures of them hugging and kissing. Looking at someone else's phone without permission, you're the worst. I didn't think you were that kind of person. I don't want to hear that from you. I'm returning those words right back at you. That's my line. You should be grateful that I'm even staying with a defective product like you who can't have children. My husband became defiant and threw horrible words at me that cut deep into my heart. I couldn't help but frown. Men are creatures who instinctively want to leave behind offspring. That's natural. Stanley took the opportunity to attack me. For a moment, I felt like giving up, but I clenched my fists and rallied myself. "That doesn't make it okay to have an affair," I retorted, but my husband turned away, showing no signs of remorse. "I wanted a child of my own blood too, but that's not possible with you, is it?" "Maybe. So, well, Sarah is younger, so that's nice, isn't it?" "That's right. I fell in love at first sight when I went to the club where she works. I was so happy when I managed to win her over and start dating her." He had a dreamy expression on his face, as if remembering those times. "After dating for a few months, she told me she was pregnant. Young women can get pregnant so easily, unlike you, old hag." Stanley was saying whatever he wanted, and I almost wanted to cover my ears. After being told all that, I had no obligation to remain his wife. "I see. I'm sorry for being a wife who couldn't meet your expectations." "Well, it's fine. It's too late for apologies now." He was leaning back in his chair looking quite arrogant. "Then you're okay with a divorce, right?" Saying that, I handed my husband the divorce papers, which I had already filled out on my side. "You're well prepared. It saves me the trouble of discussing it." Stanley started signing with a grin and without any hesitation. "Here is this good enough?" I took it from my husband and carefully put it in an envelope. While watching me do this, Stanley muttered to himself, 7 years it went by in a flash. This isn't the end. The real show starts now. Next, I placed another document in front of my husband. "What's this?" Stanley said as he picked up the paper and looked at it intently. "That's the DNA test result for your and Sarah's child." He looked at me in surprise, but quickly returned his gaze to the paper. "That can't be. It says here that no parental relationship is recognized." My husband raised his voice and desperately appealed to me. That's what it says, but it's real. What's written there is the truth. What do you mean by that? Irritated, he slammed his hand on the table. I mean exactly what it says. I deliberately echoed his words back to him. Then Stanley made an angry face and shouted, "Cut it out." I let out a big sigh. There's another father for that child. You're not related by blood to that baby. Even after I said this, my husband still didn't seem to understand what it meant. I met and talked with her directly. I reluctantly decided to explain to Stanley. After Sarah was discharged, I visited her apartment while my husband was at work. There I told her something, and then confirmed whether the child was really my husband's. At first Sarah denied it, but she finally confessed that the child's father was another man, and she agreed to do a DNA test. Before that, when I was trying to investigate her and was observing the apartment, I saw a different young man entering her home on days when Stanley didn't come at that time. I thought maybe. Damn it, Sarah, that woman betrayed me. Stanley was making a face like he had swallowed a bitter bug while listing his grudges against his mistress. Then, as if he had realized something, he looked at me. Come to think of it, what was that thing you said you told her earlier? That. I hesitated, aided for a moment, but looked straight into his eyes to tell him the truth I had been keeping silent about. You're infertile. What? That can't be. Actually, before we stopped fertility treatments, we had gone to the hospital together as a couple and had tests done. Stanley probably thought I would give up easily if I faced reality. When I said, you should get tested too just in case, he readily agreed. At that time, though, he did add the parting shot, of course, there's nothing wrong with me. I went alone on a different day to hear the test results, and what I found out was that I still had a body that made it difficult to get pregnant, and my husband was also infertile. Of course, I intended to tell my husband about this, but he was not only coming home late, but also often away from home, saying he was on business trips. We kept missing each other, and I thought this wasn't something to talk about over the phone or email, so I ended up not being able to tell him. No way, there's no way that could happen to me. My husband's face turned pale, but he still wouldn't admit it. Yes, it's true, you'll understand if you look at this. I handed him the paper with the test results. Then, after staring at it intently, Stanley crumpled up the paper and threw it on the floor. He seemed to be in considerable shock, faced with a reality he had never imagined. Sarah said she's going to legally marry the other man and raise the child with him. I told Stanley this, but he just held his head in his hands and kept his face down on the table, not moving an inch. I guess he was beyond caring about that now. I have a message from Sarah. My husband raised his face vigorously, and I played an audio on my smartphone. I'm not interested in old guys like you. I prefer younger men. A woman's voice uttered lines similar to what he had just said to me. Then even more cruel words flowed out. I only thought of you as a walking ATM. It seems Sarah had gotten pregnant with her boyfriend's child when she had no money and was wondering what to do. She thought she couldn't give up the child of the man she loved, so she planned to pretend it was the child of a strip club customer she was involved with at the time, Stanley. She figured she wouldn't have to worry about money that way. Her partner also agreed to this plan, so in the end, my husband had been thoroughly deceived by both of them. Audio ended with the dismissive words, "Thank you for spending so much money on me. From now on, I'll do my best with my husband. Don't mess with me." He pounded the table repeatedly, venting his anger that had nowhere else to go. After that, my husband suddenly became like an empty shell. At that point, I decided to deliver the final blow to him. I'll make sure you pay compensation for the affair and return the couple savings you used without permission. As I stood up from my chair and was about to go to the room to pack my things, Stanley grabbed my arm. "Wait, don't go, let go of me. I have nothing more to discuss with you. I don't want to be alone. I want to start over. Let's be good to each other like before." My husband clung to me, crying that he didn't want a divorce, but I shook off his hand with all my might. Then I waved the envelope containing the divorce papers in front of his eyes. "It's impossible. All that's left is to submit this. No, give that back to me, please." "Absolutely not. It's pathetic to be fooled by a woman while drooling over her. You brought this on yourself." When I cut him off so decisively, my husband muttered no and started crying out loud. The sight was so pitiful that it would instantly cool even 100 years of love. I sighed and left the place. After that, our divorce was finalized without any problems. Stanley kept whining until the end, but when I told him that I had already consulted with a lawyer and that it would cost him even more money if it went to court, he finally seemed to give up. I demanded a lump sum payment from him, $30,000 in compensation for the affair and $5,000 for the couple savings he had used up. Stanley complained, "I can't pay that much. It's impossible." I told him to pay from his savings. However, his balance was zero. It seems he had been lavishing quite a lot on his mistress. He apparently cried to his parents, but I had already reported everything to his parents beforehand, so he was beaten and rejected for being such a terrible son. In the end, he took out a loan to pay me. I also demanded $10,000 in compensation from his mistress, which her father agreed to pay on her behalf. She said she would repay her father properly once she could work after putting her child in daycare. As for me, I'm still working as a nurse in a care facility. There's so much to learn from the facility users who are my seniors in life, and every day is fulfilling. Recently, I've set a goal to become a midwife. I'm studying for that now. Story 3. My mother-in-law helped put my 6-month-old son to sleep. When I checked on him, he was foaming at the mouth. I cried out, "The baby is foaming." She said, "Don't be dramatic. You're overreacting." At the hospital, the doctor told me the shocking truth. My name is Sarah Thompson. I'm a 35-year-old single mother living with my 6-month-old son, Ethan. We reside in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I work as an account manager at a local advertising agency. Ethan was born on a cold November night last year after 36 hours of labor. He came into my life with a healthy cry. The moment I held his tiny hand, I knew I'd do anything for this child. I separated from Ethan's father, John, right after the birth. He said he wasn't ready to be a father and left us. Suddenly becoming a single mother, I was filled with anxiety and confusion. That's when my mother-in-law, Margaret, offered to help and moved in with us. She was 67 and had been living alone since her husband passed away. At first, I was grateful for her offer, but I also felt a bit uneasy. Margaret actively helped with Ethan's care, even after I returned to work. Her presence was truly reassuring for me. Working from early morning to late at night, Margaret's help was indispensable. However, after a few months of living together, I began to feel uncomfortable. Margaret's child care methods differed greatly from mine. For example, she insisted that you shouldn't pick up a baby immediately when it cries, and would sometimes ignore Ethan when he cried. Margaret also frequently interfered with my parenting methods. I often heard words like, "Young mothers these days spoil their children too much, and in our day, we raised kids more strictly." Her words sometimes hurt me, but being in a position of receiving help, I found it hard to object. Meanwhile, Ethan grew day by day. His first smile, his first rollover, and recently, he started making sounds that sounded like "mama." Watching his growth was my greatest joy. One weekend night, I came home unusually early. As I entered the house, I heard Margaret's voice soothing Ethan in the living room. "Now it's time to sleep. Grandma will put you to bed." I decided to wait quietly outside the room to observe for a moment. However, I didn't know then that this night would drastically change our lives. As I waited outside the living room, I watched Margaret's bedtime routine. Her voice was gentle, as if she had been caring for babies for years. But at that moment, a small doubt sprouted in my heart. Was Margaret really caring for Ethan with his best interests at heart? The next morning, as I was preparing to go to work, Margaret suddenly came into the kitchen. "Sarah, I saw how you put Ethan to bed last night. You need to be stricter," she said. I turned around in surprise. "What do you mean?" Margaret continued. "You shouldn't pick up the baby immediately when it cries. It's important to let them cry a little to develop independence." I couldn't hide my confusion at her words. But Ethan is only 6 months old. I think it's too early to demand independence from a baby. Following this conversation, Margaret's interference in child care increased dramatically. She constantly negated my parenting methods and tried to impose her own ways. "You're breastfeeding too often. You're holding him too much. Reading picture books is pointless at this age." I was bombarded with criticism almost daily. I gradually began to accumulate stress. While grateful for Margaret's presence, I was pained by her overly intrusive attitude. When I returned from work, I felt like Margaret was even taking away my time to care for Ethan. One day, I mustered up the courage to say to Margaret, "Mom, I'm Ethan's mother too. I have my own way of raising him." However, Margaret looked at me coldly and replied, "You're too young to understand. Follow my experience." These words almost broke something inside me. I felt deeply hurt, as if my ability to parent had been denied. Still, the reality was that balancing work and childcare would be difficult without Margaret's help, so I couldn't defy her. In the midst of this, I contacted John. We had hardly any relationship since Ethan's birth, but I wanted to confide in someone about this situation. "John, I need to talk to you about Ethan. I said over the phone, and he reluctantly agreed to meet. When we met at a cafe, there was an awkward atmosphere as we began our conversation. I talked about the friction with Margaret and sought John's advice. However, his response was cold. Sarah, that's your problem. It has nothing to do with me. I felt anger and disappointment at John's words. You're Ethan's father. How can you be so indifferent? My voice was trembling. John let out a deep sigh and said, I'm still not ready to be a father. I'll leave everything to you. And he stood up to leave. From that day on, I decided to completely cut ties with John. I felt he had no right to be involved in Ethan's life. At this same time, my relationship with Margaret continued to deteriorate. Her intrusive attitude escalated day by day, and I began to doubt even my own parenting judgments. The daily conflicts with my mother-in-law and the breakup with John, the stress of parenting, reached its peak, and I was exhausted both mentally and physically. Still, every time I saw Ethan smile, I strongly felt that I had to overcome these difficulties. That night, I came home late from work, completely exhausted. The clock showed 11 p.m. As I quietly entered the house, I found Margaret watching TV in the living room. Welcome back, Sarah, Margaret said in a cold tone. Ethan is already asleep. He was particularly easy to handle today. I felt slightly relieved, but also sensed something was off. Usually, Ethan would cry a lot at night, and it was always a struggle to put him to sleep. I see. Thank you, I replied as I headed towards Ethan's room. As I opened the door, I could hear Ethan's faint breathing in the dimly lit room. As I approached to check on him, my heart nearly stopped. Foam was coming out of Ethan's mouth. Ethan, I cried out involuntarily. I quickly picked him up, and his body was abnormally hot and limp. Ethan, open your eyes. It's Mama. Hearing my scream, Margaret rushed into the room. What happened? Ethan is foaming at the mouth, I explained desperately. His breathing seems labored, and his body is hot. However, Margaret's reaction was unexpected. Don't exaggerate. You're just overreacting. I stared at Margaret in disbelief. This is not overreaction. There's clearly something wrong with Ethan. Margaret, trying to appear calm, said, Sarah, you're not used to childcare, so you panic over little things. Ethan is just in a deep sleep. I was shaking with anger and anxiety. This is not normal sleep. I'm calling an ambulance. As I reached for the phone, Margaret grabbed my arm. Stop it. There's no need to take him to the hospital. At that moment, something snapped inside me. I shook off Margaret's hand and said firmly, Ethan is my son. I will protect him. I quickly grabbed my cell phone and dialed 911. Please help. My baby is foaming at the mouth and seems to be having trouble breathing, I explained, while following the operator's instructions and holding Ethan close. As the sound of the ambulance siren approached, Margaret stood in the corner of the room with a disgruntled expression. You're really overreacting. By tomorrow, you'll see everything is fine, but I couldn't hear her words. Feeling Ethan's small body hot and trembling in my arms, I was just desperately waiting for the paramedics to arrive. The paramedics arrived and quickly assessed Ethan's condition. We need to transport him to the hospital immediately, they said, and I let out a sigh of relief. As I was about to get into the ambulance, Margaret called out, I'll come with you. I replied without hesitation, No, thank you. I'll be fine on my own. Margaret looked surprised, but I had no time to worry about her feelings. As the ambulance doors closed and we headed to the hospital with sirens blaring, I held Ethan's tiny hand tightly. It's okay, Ethan. Mama's here. You're going to be all right, I whispered. In the ambulance, I reflected on the recent events, Margaret's abnormal reaction, Ethan's unnatural state, and my own intuition. I had a feeling that something much bigger was lurking beneath the surface. When we arrived at the hospital, Ethan was immediately taken to the examination room. I waited in the waiting room, trembling with anxiety and fear for the doctor's diagnosis. At this point, I still didn't know about the terrifying truth that was about to be revealed. In the hospital waiting room, I spent a long time praying for my son's safety. Eventually, Dr. Thompson appeared and called me into the examination room. Mrs. Thompson, please have a seat. His expression was serious. We need to talk about Ethan's condition. I sat down with trembling hands and listened to the doctor's words. We've got Ethan's blood test results. A significant amount of benzodiazepine class drugs was detected in his system. I was at a loss for words. Drugs? But how? Dr. Thompson continued cautiously. This type of drug is typically used to treat anxiety or insomnia. However, it should never be administered to someone of Ethan's age. His symptoms are clearly due to an overdose. Various thoughts swirled in my head. I couldn't understand how Ethan could have ingested such drugs. Mrs. Thompson, in situations like this, we are obligated to report to Child Protective Services, the doctor said quietly. At those words, I came to my senses. Wait, please. I would never do anything to harm my son. There must be some explanation for this. Dr. Thompson looked at me with sympathetic eyes. I understand. However, this is a serious situation. Ethan's safety must be our top priority. When I returned to the hospital room, my heart ached at the sight of Ethan receiving and drip. Looking at the tubes connected to his small body, I made a decision. I must uncover the truth behind this. When I got home, Margaret was already asleep. I quietly entered Ethan's room and started searching for any clues around the crib, in the toy box, inside the dresser, but I found nothing. Suddenly, my eyes turned to Margaret's room. It would be an invasion of her privacy, but for Ethan's safety, I had no choice. I quietly snuck into her room, and my attention was drawn to the nightstand drawer. When I opened it, I found several bottles of pills inside. Checking the labels, I saw they were the benzodiazepine class drugs the doctor had mentioned. It can't be. I was speechless. The next morning, I decided to confront Margaret about the truth. Mom, we need to talk about last night, I began nervously. Margaret responded with a composed expression. What is it? Drugs were detected in Ethan's body, the same kind you have. Margaret's expression froze for a moment, but she quickly composed herself. What are you talking about? What about my medication? Mom, please be honest. Did you give Ethan your pills? Margaret suddenly became furious. How dare you say such a thing? I would never hurt Ethan. This reaction only strengthened my suspicions. However, I still lacked decisive evidence. That afternoon, I contacted John. I explained the situation and asked for his cooperation. Sarah, that's terrible, but what can I do? John answered hesitantly. John, you're Ethan's father. Let's uncover the truth together. After a long silence, John sighed. All right, I'll help as much as I can. We made a plan. John would come to the house and distract Margaret while I thoroughly searched her room. On the day of our plan, John arrived as scheduled. Margaret was surprised by the sudden visit of her grandson's father, but began entertaining him in the living room. Taking advantage of this opportunity, I snuck into Margaret's room. As I carefully searched through drawers and shelves, I found what appeared to be a diary. When I opened it, I found shocking content written inside. Ethan's crying is too loud to sleep. Tried giving him a small dose of sleeping pills. It worked, so I'm relieved. Sarah doesn't listen to my advice. This child is being spoiled too much. I'll increase the dose a bit more. My hands were shaking. This was the decisive evidence. When I returned to the living room, John and Margaret were deep in conversation. I gave John a knowing look, and he nodded in understanding. Margaret, we need to talk, I said with a trembling voice. Margaret looked puzzled. What is it? I know everything about you giving Ethan drugs. The color drained from Margaret's face. What are you talking about? I took out the diary. This is the evidence. Margaret was at a loss for words and collapsed into a chair. John stood next to me with a shocked expression. Why did you do this? John asked. Margaret answered through tears. I just wanted to keep Ethan quiet. I thought Sarah's way of raising him was wrong. My chest felt like it was going to burst with anger and sadness, but at the same time, I felt relieved that the truth had come to light. Margaret, you can't stay here anymore, I said firmly. John placed his hand on my shoulder and quietly said, Sarah, I'll help too, to protect Ethan. At that moment, I saw a sign of reconciliation between John and me. We made a decision to fight together for Ethan's future. After Margaret's confession, the atmosphere in the room was tense. I took a deep breath and considered my next move. Margaret, your actions are unforgivable. You put Ethan's life at risk, I said as calmly as I could. Margaret looked up, this time with eyes full of anger. What do you know? I was thinking of Ethan's best interests. That's not love. I interrupted. Your actions are abuse. At those words, Margaret's expression contorted. Abuse? Don't be ridiculous. She stood up and walked towards me. John tried to intervene, but I stopped him with my hand. This issue had to be resolved by me. Margaret, I can't let you stay here anymore. I'm going to call the police, I announced with a shaking voice. At that moment, Madness flickered in Margaret's eyes. "You don't understand anything," she screamed and suddenly lunged at me. John moved quickly to restrain Margaret. "Mom, stop it." Taking advantage of this, I pulled out my phone and called 911. "Please help. A family member has been giving drugs to my baby. She's becoming violent now." For the few minutes until the police arrived, the room was filled with an eerie tension. Margaret, still restrained by John, glared at me with hatred. When the police officers entered the house, I let out a sigh of relief. I explained the situation and submitted the diary as evidence. "Margaret Thompson, you're under arrest on suspicion of child abuse," the officer announced, and the color drained from Margaret's face. As I watched her being handcuffed and led away, I was overwhelmed with complex emotions: anger, sadness, and a bit of relief. After the police left, John and I sat quietly in the living room. After a long silence, John spoke up. "Sarah, I'm really sorry. I should have been involved with Ethan sooner." I let out a deep sigh. "John, I was disappointed in your response. It's true, but I'm grateful for your cooperation in this matter." John looked at me with a serious expression. "From now on, I want to work together for Ethan's sake." Those words lit a small flame of hope in my heart. A few weeks later, Ethan fully recovered and returned home. Seeing his smile made me feel that all the difficulties we had overcome were worth it. True to his word, John became actively involved in parenting. It became a regular sight to see him taking Ethan to the park on weekends or reading picture books together. We're not a perfect family, but we're building a relationship where we respect each other and prioritize Ethan's happiness. One day when Ethan called me Mama for the first time, tears welled up in my eyes. I was filled with gratitude for having overcome the hardships and made it this far. The future looks bright and full of hope. I believe we can surely give Ethan the best life possible. With this belief, I continue to move forward. Story 4. Cleaning my late daughter's house, I found my missing granddaughter chained up. "I can't take it. I want Mommy," she cried. As I reached for the chain around her neck, I learned the truth. "I can't take it anymore. I want to go to Mommy," my 5-year-old granddaughter pleaded with me, her eyes hollow and her body emaciated. I found her chained up in the storage shed, where I had gone to sort through my daughter's belongings. "Weren't you missing? And your mommy has passed away, sweetheart," I said. "I want to see my daughter too." Sharing her exact feelings, my tears flowed uncontrollably as my granddaughter kept repeating, "I want to go to Mommy." I made a decision. "All right then, shall we go to the other side together?" But just as I placed my hands on my granddaughter's neck, something caught my eye that felt so familiar. At that moment, realizing a certain truth, I vowed to seek revenge. On my daughter's wedding day, I was overjoyed and called out to Vanessa, "Be happy, darling. I'm Susan, 58 years old, working as a medical clerk at a nearby hospital. If I may say so myself, after losing my husband early on, I worked hard to raise my daughter Vanessa and her younger brother. Mom, thank you for everything. You must be tired. Let me give you a shoulder massage." Vanessa, like her kind father, is a thoughtful daughter. She would always say things like that to me, which was so comforting. After becoming an adult, Vanessa started running an online shop and seemed to have quite a bit in savings. A few years ago, she married Daniel, a wonderful elite company employee, and they were blessed with a cute daughter named Olivia. My son also graduated from university, became a company employee, and became independent. I was finally able to relax a bit. However, on a hot summer day, Vanessa suddenly came home with Olivia. Her expression was dark, and she didn't look well. "What's wrong? You don't seem yourself. Did something happen?" I asked. It might just be my imagination, but I feel like Daniel's attitude towards me has been getting colder lately. According to Vanessa, Daniel would always come home late at night smelling of alcohol. Moreover, he would ignore her when she tried to talk to him, yell "shut up" at her, and sometimes even hit or kick her. And he says he doesn't need to contribute to our living expenses because I have my own income. He says he's saving his share, but he won't even show me the bank book. That's troubling. I wonder what's gotten into Daniel. It must be hard for you. At this, Vanessa bit her lip, and tears started to fall. For my patient daughter to show such weakness, she must be really suffering. I gently spoke to her. "Why don't you try living apart from him for a while? If you want a divorce, you can come back home anytime." However, my daughter didn't nod in agreement. "Thank you. I'll keep an eye on things for a bit longer." Talking to you has made me feel a little better. I'm really okay. I can't make any quick decisions with Olivia to think about. Forcing a smile at my worried face, she continued. Besides, Daniel was originally a kind person. Maybe if I try harder, he'll go back to his old self. I'll give it a bit more effort. With that, she left with Olivia looking lonely. If only I had listened to her more seriously that day, things wouldn't have turned out like this. I would come to deeply regret this later. A month later, I suddenly received a call from Daniel saying that Vanessa had passed away. What? That can't be true, can it? I couldn't believe it, my child suddenly passing away. According to Daniel, Vanessa had taken her own life by jumping into a waterfall, taking Olivia with her. What's more, he said a note like a suicide note typed on a computer was found saying, I've lost confidence in living. I'm departing with Olivia. I lost my precious daughter because of Vanessa. What are you going to do about it? What do you mean? I was confused by the shock of my daughter's death and Daniel's harsh words. It's because of your upbringing that Vanessa turned into such a terrible woman. Who would even involve her daughter? It's your fault, isn't it? My fault. Of course it is. With a bitter expression, Daniel then told me something even more unbelievable. Apparently, while Vanessa's body had been found, Olivia was still missing. I don't care about Vanessa. I just wish my daughter had been found. To top it off, he said he had already cremated Vanessa in a private funeral and scattered her ashes in the sea because it would look bad to the public. How could you? Pushed to the brink of despair, unable to even see my beloved daughter's final moments, I was left in shock. After that, I couldn't focus on anything and took a leave of absence from work. Day and night, the images of my daughter and granddaughter kept appearing in my mind, and my tears wouldn't stop flowing. A week later, I received a phone call from Daniel. I want to move on quickly, so I'm going to sort through Vanessa's belongings. I'm throwing away everything that belonged to her. As he rattled on one-sidedly, I managed to interrupt him with, Please wait, let me do it. I couldn't be there for my daughter's final moments, but at least let me take care of her belongings. Daniel seemed unsatisfied with my words, but I couldn't back down. 1 week was far too soon for sorting through belongings, no matter how you looked at it. Plus, given that my daughter had consulted me before, I couldn't fully trust Daniel and wanted to check for any clues with my own eyes. So, unable to sit still, I went to my daughter's house the next evening. I couldn't reach Daniel, so I waited in front of the entrance, but even late into the night, he didn't come home. Left with no choice, I called Daniel again, only to be met with sudden anger. It's inconsiderate to come without notice. I'm working late today, so go home. Besides, didn't I tell you I'd take care of Vanessa's stuff? Don't ever come to my house again. I'm sorry for bothering you when you're busy, but Vanessa gave me a spare key before in case of emergencies. Can I use that to go in? Of course not. Geez, what a pushy old hag. I'll sue you. His cold words shocked me, but Daniel paid no mind and kept yelling before hanging up. I didn't have the courage to enter the house without Daniel's permission, so I was about to leave, but then a strange smell caught my attention. It was like rotting garbage. As I traced the source of the smell, it seemed to be coming from the storage shed in the backyard. What could that smell be? With an ominous feeling, I went around to the back of the shed and peeked through a window. There, something was moving inside. It was too dark to see clearly, but it looked like a living creature. What could it be? I felt a chill run down my spine, but I felt I couldn't leave it alone. I tried to open the shed, but the old lock was broken, and the door was blocked with something like a stick. Even so, after shaking the door violently a few times, I managed to open it, and as I nervously entered, a shocking sight greeted me. My granddaughter, who I had been told was missing, was chained up inside. Olivia. As I rushed over to her, my granddaughter slowly looked up at me with a puzzled expression. Grandma. Around Olivia were scattered empty lunch boxes with a rotten smell and half-eaten bread, plus there was a bucket with excrement in it. How terrible. You poor thing. I was more shocked by this situation than happy to find Olivia alive. I gently hugged my small granddaughter. However, Olivia, with her emaciated body and vacant eyes, whispered, I can't take it anymore. I want to go to Mommy. Soon her words made my tears flow uncontrollably. Grandma, take me to Mommy. Yes, let's go together. Overwhelmed by the grief of losing my daughter, I put my hands on Olivia's neck, intending to go to the other world with her. That's when I noticed the necklace around Olivia's neck. It was the one I had given to Vanessa as a charm. There was also a key attached to the necklace that shouldn't have been there. Where did you get this? When I asked about the familiar key, Olivia told me. This is... What Olivia said next shocked me to my core, and I felt my blood boiling with anger. So that's what happened. I absolutely cannot forgive this. I found some pliers in the shed and managed to cut the chain, then took Olivia to a certain place. This is how I decided to seek revenge on behalf of my daughter. The next day, Daniel barged into my home. His eyes were bloodshot, his brows furrowed, and his face was beet red. You took Olivia, didn't you? She's my daughter. Give her back. Whatever do you mean? I've called you countless times, and you didn't answer. It must be you. Daniel, his face getting redder as he yelled, didn't seem to realize he was contradicting himself. But wasn't Olivia missing? Daniel stumbled over his words for a moment, then glared at me. How dare you call yourself a father after what you've done to her? She's just a spoiled brat who doesn't listen to her parents. I was just disciplining her. Besides, Vanessa took her own life because she was troubled by raising Olivia. Daniel started listing how unmanageable Olivia was. This is the first I'm hearing of this. Of course I didn't tell you. You just spoil her. That's why I said she was missing. How I deal with my child is my right as a parent. It's none of your business. But chaining her up and locking her away goes beyond discipline. I'm going to report this. Suddenly, Daniel's lips curled into a smirk, and he started laughing. You don't have any proof. Oh, but I do. We should be able to get a medical report too. I showed him the pictures of Olivia I had taken on my phone. When did you give me Olivia? Daniel lunged at me, trying to grab my phone. Just then, someone came out of the next room shouting, "Stop," and grabbed Daniel's arm. It was my son. Why are you here? Let go of me. Actually, when I told my son yesterday about finding Olivia, he rushed over to help. Daniel, now pinned down by my son, who had been trained in American football during his college days, looked pathetic. We know that you stole Vanessa's savings and that you beat her up when she found out about your affair. Daniel looked at me suspiciously, asking, How do you know all that? Vanessa told me. Huh? She's alive. Daniel's face turned pale with shock. I told him about the situation when I met my daughter. Actually, the key attached to Olivia's necklace was from my old family home. It's now vacant, but we kept it for sentimental reasons. And at that time, Olivia had pleaded, Mommy said this necklace was a charm. Mommy is hurt. Please help. Hearing this, I saw a glimmer of hope that my daughter might still be alive. After rescuing Olivia, I headed straight to my old family home and found Vanessa collapsed there. Vanessa, hang in there. As I lifted her up, I heard a faint whisper, Mom. Olivia also clung to Vanessa crying. Mommy, I missed you. I quickly called 911, and Vanessa was rushed to the hospital and saved. The doctor said that if we had been a little later, she would have lost her life. Olivia was also in poor nutritional condition, so she was admitted to the hospital as well. Thus, I felt joy from the bottom of my heart at the safety of my daughter, whom I thought I would never see again. But at the same time, my whole body burned with anger towards the person who had put my daughter and granddaughter through such a terrible ordeal. Later, I heard the whole story from Vanessa after she regained consciousness in the hospital. Apparently, while cleaning, Vanessa had discovered evidence of Daniel's affair and the fact that he had embezzled her money from his computer, and she had confronted him about it. He flew into a rage and beat and kicked her, injuring her. When Vanessa, feeling a sharp pain in her kicked stomach and becoming dizzy, asked Daniel for help, he just laughed and went to the bedroom. Feeling it was dangerous to stay at home, Vanessa fled with Olivia's help. They managed to escape from the house, but Vanessa had been robbed of her bank book, wallet, and phone by Daniel. With no other choice, she staggered for about an hour until she reached my old family home. Olivia, trying to help her mother, went back home to get Vanessa's phone and wallet while she was sleeping, and that's when her father caught her. But even when chained up, Olivia never revealed Vanessa's whereabouts, no matter how many times she was asked. Vanessa and Olivia were on the brink of death. Vanessa was pale and barely breathing. Even if she had escaped, it was only a matter of time. Daniel spoke lightly. Olivia wouldn't talk, and there was no contact from anywhere, so I just thought they had gone to the other world somewhere out of sight. Thinking Vanessa was dead, Daniel created a suicide note on the computer to make it look like Vanessa had taken her own life. Furthermore, he decided to keep Olivia locked up in the shed, planning to send her to the other world eventually. It was just a marital quarrel. The affair was just a game. Vanessa's alive now, so isn't that enough? That's not the point. I'm recording this conversation too, and I'm going to report it to the police. Hearing the word police, Daniel suddenly panicked and started begging for forgiveness on his knees. His sudden change of attitude was astounding. I'm sorry. I'll break up with my affair partner and be kind to Vanessa from now on. So please don't involve the police. I can't believe anything you say. When I refused him like this, he tried to cling to my arm. If I get arrested, Olivia will be left without a father. Is that okay with you? I brushed away Daniel's hand as he pleaded with tears in his eyes, desperately trying to save himself. She'd be happier without a father like you. But at that moment, the police arrived and took Daniel away. After that, Vanessa divorced Daniel. Daniel received a prison sentence and was fired from his company due to his conviction. Vanessa demanded $1,000 for the savings he had embezzled, $20,000 in damages for the affair and injuries, and $150,000 in child support. She also demanded $110,000 in damages from Daniel's mistress. It seems Daniel had planned to live with his mistress, but for her, it was just a fling. When Daniel's parents learned of his actions, they apologized to Vanessa and sold some land to cover the money Daniel owed, but they intend to make Daniel work to pay them back. Daniel is bound to face a miserable situation even after his release. Vanessa and Olivia, now recovered, have come back to live with me. Vanessa, fully recovered, has started working and is living a peaceful life. I'm also energized and doing my best for them. Story 5. Coming home from a trip, I found my grandson collapsed and unconscious on the doorstep. When I asked, "Where are mommy and daddy?" he replied, "They're under the tomb." After learning the truth, I immediately called the police. In a quiet suburban neighborhood of Pennsylvania, 62-year-old Judy Harris was enjoying her peaceful retirement days. After a nursing career spanning over 30 years, she now only occasionally volunteers for community health consultations. Her joy in life was her 6-year-old grandson, Tommy. Judy has 2 children. Her older daughter, Sarah, lives far away, but they keep in frequent contact. Her son, Scott, lives nearby and is raising Tommy with his wife, Linda. However, recently Judy had been feeling a bit uneasy about Scott and Linda's parenting approach. It's important to encourage a child's independence, but those two are taking it a bit too far, Judy had once confided to a friend. Still, she was grateful to be able to watch her grandson grow up close by. The oak leaves swaying in the breeze quietly announced the arrival of autumn. Judy had just returned from a short 3-day trip. The little getaway with her friends who volunteer at the nursing home had been a much-needed refresh for her. Placing her suitcase in the entryway, Judy took a deep breath. "I'll stop by Scott's house and give Tommy his souvenir," she murmured to herself. Her love for her grandson transformed her tired expression into a gentle smile. After a 15-minute drive, Judy arrived in front of Scott's house. However, her excitement quickly turned to anxiety. She could see a small figure lying on the doorstep. The oak leaves swaying in the breeze quietly announced the arrival of autumn. 62-year-old Judy Harris had just returned from a short 3-day trip. Her salt and pepper hair was neatly arranged, and her warm blue eyes told of her years of experience as a nurse. Placing her suitcase in the entryway, Judy took a deep breath. "I'll stop by Scott's house and give Tommy his souvenir," she murmured to herself. Her love for her grandson transformed her tired expression into a gentle smile. After a 15-minute drive, Judy arrived in front of Scott's house. However, her excitement quickly turned to anxiety. She could see a small figure lying on the doorstep. Oh no! Judy quickly got out of the car and rushed to the doorstep. There she found her 6-year-old grandson, Tommy, unconscious. His small body was cold, and his face was pale. "Tommy, are you all right?" Judy quickly assessed Tommy's condition, drawing on her experience as a nurse. Fortunately, she could detect faint breathing and a pulse. She was about to call 911 when Tommy let out a small groan and opened his eyes. "Grandma." Judy's face showed relief at Tommy's faint call. However, her next worry immediately surfaced. "Tommy, I'm so glad. Where are Mom and Dad? Are they inside the house?" Tears welled up in Tommy's eyes, and his next words made Judy's heart nearly stop. "Mom and Dad are under the tomb." Judy caught her breath. Confusion and fear enveloped her heart. The words, "under the tomb," echoed ominously in her ears. "What do you mean, Tommy?" But before Tommy could answer, he lost consciousness again. Judy held her grandson close, her mind racing through various possibilities: an accident, a crime, or just a misunderstanding. The sound of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance. Judy took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. As she prepared for what was to come, she whispered quietly, "It's okay, Tommy. Grandma's here. I'll find out what happened, I promise." As the ambulance sirens grew closer, Judy's heart was pounding. However, her years of experience as a nurse helped her stay calm. The paramedics arrived and quickly assessed Tommy's condition. Fortunately, there's no immediate danger to his life, the paramedic reported, and Judy breathed a sigh of relief. However, they recommended a more thorough examination at the hospital, to which Judy readily agreed. The 3 hours at the hospital felt like an eternity to Judy. As she sat restlessly in the waiting room, the doctor finally appeared. "Mrs. Harris, your grandson shows signs of dehydration and mild food poisoning. However, we've administered appropriate treatment, so he should recover by tonight." While relieved by the doctor's words, questions swirled in Judy's mind. How did Tommy end up in this condition, and where were Scott and Linda? Tommy woke up at dusk. When Judy entered the hospital room, a look of relief spread across his young face. "Grandma, Tommy, it's all right. Grandma's here." Judy gently held her grandson's hand. "Can you talk a little? Can you tell me about Mom and Dad?" Tommy hesitated for a moment, but then began to speak in a small voice. "Mom and Dad went to Egypt. They said they were going to see the pyramids." "Egypt?" Judy couldn't hide her surprise. "When did they go?" Maybe 3 days ago." Tommy looked up at the ceiling, trying to remember. "Dad said they were going under the tomb, but I couldn't go." Judy felt anger at her son and daughter-in-law's irresponsibility, but tried not to let Tommy see it. "I see. So who was taking care of you while Mom and Dad were away?" Tommy shook his head. "No one. I was alone." Pain shot through Judy's chest. Leaving a 6-year-old child alone to go on an overseas trip. She took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "Tommy, you did well, but didn't your tummy hurt?" Tommy thought for a moment before answering. "Yes, my tummy started hurting yesterday. I ate a sandwich from the fridge." Judy began to piece together the situation: a neglected child, improper meals, and resulting food poisoning. Her anger grew, but right now, caring for Tommy was the priority. "I understand, Tommy. It's okay now. Grandma will take care of you." As she hugged Tommy, Judy made a silent vow to protect this child and make him happy, and to confront Scott and Linda sternly. That afternoon, Sarah arrived. The two women faced each other with serious expressions, discussing how to proceed. They considered various options, including legal measures and contacting Child Protective Services. As night fell, Judy and Sarah were contemplating their next move with resolve. They were determined to take all necessary actions, prioritizing Tommy's happiness and safety. The morning after Sarah's arrival, Judy made a heavy decision. At the breakfast table, she faced Sarah with a serious expression. "Sarah, I'm going to contact Child Protective Services. This is a problem we can't handle on our own." Sarah nodded quietly. "You're right, Mom. Tommy's safety is the most important thing." Judy took a deep breath and picked up the phone. She called the Child Protective Services, CPS, hotline and briefly explained the situation. A few hours later, social worker Emily Johnson visited. Emily was a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. She sat in the living room, facing Judy and Sarah, carefully listening to the details of the situation. "Mrs. Harris, please tell me more about what happened," Emily gently prompted. Judy explained the sequence of events, detailing Tommy's condition and his parents' actions. Emily listened intently, occasionally taking notes. "This is indeed a serious situation," Emily began, choosing her words carefully. "First, I recommend starting legal proceedings to become Tommy's temporary guardian. We should also report this to the police as a possible case of child neglect." Judy and Sarah looked at each other and nodded. Emily continued, "I can refer you to a trustworthy lawyer, and I'll support you in reporting to the police." That afternoon, Judy met with the recommended lawyer, Martha Clark. Martha was an experienced female lawyer in her 50s, highly regarded in the field of child welfare. "Mrs. Harris, let's start the petition to become your grandson's temporary guardian right away," Martha said firmly. "We'll ask the court for an emergency protection order. This will allow you to act as Tommy's legal guardian, even if his parents suddenly return. Judy's face showed relief. Thank you, Miss Clark. What should I do? Martha explained in detail the necessary documents and procedures, and Judy signed them on the spot. At the same time, with Emily's help, they reported to the police. They reported the possibility of child neglect, and a formal investigation was initiated. While legal proceedings were underway, Judy and Sarah devoted themselves to caring for Tommy. They took him to see Dr. Anderson, a local pediatrician, for a checkup and received instructions for appropriate treatment and nutritional management. Tommy's physical recovery is progressing well, Dr. Anderson told Judy after the examination. However, psychological care is also important. The sudden absence of his parents must be causing him great anxiety. Judy nodded, recalling Tommy's behavior. Indeed, Tommy had woken up several times in the middle of the night from nightmares, crying out, "Mom, Dad, please continue to provide a stable environment and love as much as possible," Dr. Anderson gently advised. And if necessary, we should consider counseling with a child psychologist. From that day on, Judy and Sarah took turns caring for Tommy, ensuring that someone was always by his side. Tommy gradually began to smile again, but Judy's heart ached when she saw him staring into the distance at times. "Tommy, it's okay. Grandma and Aunt Sarah are here for you." Judy gently hugged her grandson and kissed his forehead. Tommy nodded slightly and clung to Judy. "Grandma, when are Mom and Dad coming back?" Judy hesitated for a moment but answered gently, "I'm sure it will be soon. Until then, Grandma and Aunt Sarah will take good care of you." Tommy softly replied, "Okay," and buried his face in Judy's chest. As Judy stroked her grandson's soft hair, she made a silent vow. "I'll make sure you're happy, Tommy, no matter what." As night fell, a warm atmosphere filled Judy's house. Although legal issues were still unresolved, Judy strongly felt that protecting Tommy's smile at this moment was the most important thing. In the midst of busy days taking care of Tommy, Judy's cell phone rang. Her heart raced when she saw her son Scott's name displayed on the screen. "Hello, Scott." Judy's voice contained a coldness. "Mom, we're back. Where's Tommy?" "He's not at home." Scott's voice sounded frantic. "Tommy is at my house. Come over right away. Bring Linda too." Judy answered shortly and hung up. An hour later, Scott and Linda were standing at Judy's front door. Their tan skin and expensive-looking clothes told of their enjoyable trip. "Mom, what's going on?" Scott asked with a confused expression. Judy invited them into the living room and faced them with a stern expression. "Sit down. We need to talk." As Scott and Linda sat down, Judy took a deep breath and began to speak. "Do you know what happened to Tommy while you were on your trip?" Scott shrugged. "He was fine, wasn't he? We left food for him, and he can take care of himself." Anger flashed in Judy's eyes. "He wasn't fine. When I found him, Tommy was unconscious and collapsed." A gasp could be heard from Linda. Scott's face turned pale. But we... Scott stumbled over his words. Judy continued mercilessly. "Food poisoning. How did you think a 6-year-old child left alone could safely manage his meals?" Linda opened her mouth. "We value our child's independence. Tommy is a smart kid, so... Independence." Judy's voice rose. "Leaving a 6-year-old alone for 10 days is independence? That's neglect. It's abuse." Scott tried to argue, but Judy cut him off. "Listen, I heard you want to take care of someone else's children while leaving your own child behind. What were you thinking?" Scott and Linda looked at each other and started making excuses. It was a work obligation they couldn't refuse. They thought Tommy would be fine. Judy looked at them with disappointment. "I don't see any sign of remorse from you. That's why I decided to take legal action." "Legal action?" Scott exclaimed. "Yes. I've contacted Child Protective Services and started the process to become Tommy's temporary guardian." Linda stood up, raising her voice. "How could you do that? We're his parents." Judy calmly replied, "I can't trust Tommy with you anymore after you abandoned your parental responsibilities." At that moment, Tommy's small figure was seen in the corner of the room. He was looking at his parents with a frightened expression. Scott tried to approach his son, but Tommy hid behind Judy. "Dad, Mom, I was scared." Tommy's voice was trembling. At those words, Scott and Linda's expressions changed. For the first time, they seemed to understand the gravity of their actions. Gently hugging Tommy, Judy told Scott and Linda, "Think carefully about what you should do for Tommy from now on. Until the court makes a decision, I'll be taking care of Tommy." Scott and Linda left the house wordlessly, hanging their heads. A few months later, the court granted Judy legal guardianship of Tommy. Scott and Linda were ordered to undergo a strict parenting education program and were only allowed supervised visitation rights. Tommy gradually regained his smile and grew healthily under Judy's loving care. As an epilogue, a scene from Tommy's 11th birthday party 5 years later is described. Scott and Linda are also present, interacting with Tommy with a more mature attitude than before. Judy smiles with relief as she watches her grandson's happy face. Through this experience, the entire family grew and learned the true meaning of love and responsibility.